Interdisciplinary Studies. I'm secretly here to sabotage. So we have 90 minutes to get through 5 very pressing and interesting questions. Be extremely difficult. We're going to give each of our panelists an opportunity to respond first, then we'll open discussion to the floor.
Norman, is your mic still on your stand?
Yeah, I think it's picking up my voice from here.
Or is the one on the desk, actually?
Or the one on the desk.
Yeah. One.
Great. All right, so we have 5 questions today. One is on differentiation, specialization, accessibility, sustainability, and balance. Let me first begin by introducing our panelists. At the far end here is Hubi Yu, a third-year student at McGill University. She's majoring in history and minoring in psychology and interdisciplinary life sciences, one of the many combinations available at McGill. She is president of BASIC, the Bachelor of Arts and Science Integrative Council, and she enjoys student politics. Please welcome Hubi. Mary Koziel is currently the president of the McMaster Students' Union, and she is also a 5th-year Arts and Science student with a minor in Indigenous Studies. Amongst her other responsibilities as MSU president, Mary lobbies administration at McMaster University and government officials from all 3 levels for better quality of education. She is passionate about interdisciplinary studies and hopes to pursue a career that allows her to continue blending the arts with the sciences. Please welcome Mary. Dr. Sarah Simmons has a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Astronomy and a PhD from Leicester in Ancient Egyptian Astronomy. She has worked in educational project management in the United Kingdom, and one of her projects involved designing and implementing the first interdisciplinary science degree program using problem-based learning as its core pedagogical methodology. Say that one 3 times fast. Dr. Simmons has been an assistant professor at McMaster University for 2 years, working on setting up the innovative integrative sciences program. Please welcome Dr. Simmons. Now, I'm not very good on my impressions of Dr. Louis Greenspan, but he's written his biography in the first person. So I will have to say it. Don't judge me, I can't do Greenspan. But I was born in Poland and grew up in Nova Scotia. I finished my MA in the history of philosophy under George Grant, who was later to become famous in Canada for writing a book saying that Canada is a has-been. Grant told me that Ontario was a contemporary version of Sodom and Gomorrah. So I went to a more innocent place, New York, Columbia University, to continue my studies. I dropped out after 2 years because analytic philosophy and philosophy of science have become the cutting edge of philosophy in America, and I had no interest in either. In those days, you didn't need a PhD. It feels like I had to walk uphill in my grandfather's pajamas. You didn't need a PhD to teach in Canadian University. Later, Grant surprised me by coming to Ontario himself, and surprised me further by inviting me to participate in the founding of a department of religion at McMaster. Suddenly, in the late 60s, the Canadian University establishment decided that PhDs were indeed necessary. So I went to Brandeis to a famous History of Ideas department whose founder, Herbert Marcuse, taught that the United States was Sodom and Gomorrah. Fortunately, McMaster had just purchased the Bertrand Russell archives, and I had the privilege of working on them for my PhD. In addition, I have studied in Israel, taught in what was once called Yugoslavia, and continue to work in the field of religion and society. Please welcome Dr. Greenspan. This is our panel, ladies and gentlemen. Some housekeeping issues. The first question is 20 minutes. The next 3 are 15 minutes apiece, and the last is 20. In the event that we're deep in discussion and we'd like to continue, we will, and we'll skip over whatever question was scheduled for the time. First, there'll be answers from our panelists. We'll do it rolling, so Hubi will start first, then Dr. Greenspan, then Mary, so that not every person is answering first or last. And then we will open the question to, open the floor for discussion, and you'll just put your hand up, and I'll try to, I don't know all of your names, so I'll just write down what you're wearing or something. Great, so we can begin with our first question. The Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario, ECHO, is an independent agency that is funded by the provincial government. Last year, it released its report, The Benefits of Greater Differentiation of Ontario's University Sector. There's been much debate about surrounding the proposed plan to differentiate Ontario's university to become more specialized in a limited number of fields. For instance, McMaster could concentrate on health sciences, whereas Queen's could concentrate in engineering. This debate over differentiation raises several important questions about the government's role in the modern university. To what extent should the government be involved in determining which programs are a success, and what types of programs a university would run? And would this necessarily spell the end of interdisciplinary programs? We'll begin with Dr. Greenspan.
Oh, sorry, I had the questions in a different order.
Well, which order would you like to start?
All right, I'll start with the question you asked.
Thank you.
But, it depends on what I said to answer the other questions. The question of having different universities specialize in different, I think that the question of having universities specialize in different, so can you hear me? In different
Just turn it off.
I've forgot what I was going to say. Having different universities specializing in different areas is not such a bad thing, provided that all students in the province have access to the different areas that they're interested in, but also have access to interdisciplinary programs of the kind that we are. I'll talk more about those when we come to the question that I thought was first. The problem with this question is that it kind of assumes that the government is running the university system, and that's not quite the case. The universities are being run by funding agencies of various sorts, and who's doing the funding and why they're doing the funding is of crucial importance. Now let me illustrate that. The last year that I was a full-time faculty member, I was the special cases representative of the Faculty Association, and the problem was preserving various faculty members' jobs because we were going into big economic crisis. Now the biggest problem I had was with faculty members in medicine who had been hired and given tenure but weren't being paid by the university. And the reason for that was that they were funded from outside, usually funded by the government. So the university didn't have to worry about paying them. But in this particular year, everyone was retained their tenure, but didn't retain their funding. So there was enormous pressure to drop those people who were doing basic science. I remember a couple of people who were studying the heart and so on, and give the funds to those who were doing far more practical things. So from that point of view, the pressures on interdisciplinary programs and the pressures are not from the government, but from other funding agencies whose agendas more or less determine what will be researched and studied in the university. So I would say, yes, it's all right to have different specializations, provided the specializations are selected in some academic fashion, and provided that there are general programs of the sort that we cover. The prospects of this are very dark. In England now, they're redoing the universities, and funding is determined by a formula in which the various departments have to show that what they're teaching makes their graduates employable. So once we have what makes their graduates employable, then we have a very narrow university agenda. So our problems don't come from how the government will divide the specializations. Our problems in this respect don't come from specializations per se. They come from what specializations and how the universities will determine its programs. Stanley Fish, who wrote an article on this last week, made a good point. I came to university, he says, as a Milton scholar. Now, who the hell is going to want Milton scholars?
Dr. Greenspan. Reminder to our panelists, we'll try to keep them in the area of 3 minutes. Mary, you're next.
Okay. I'm glad you're talking about the issue of differentiation because this is something that's come up a lot recently. And differentiation can mean a lot of different things. One of the possible manifestations is having institutions that focus more on teaching, whereas others focus more on research. And obviously the implications for master in creating the same incentives for every university, universities are forced to compete with one another for the same things. And in doing so, they actually become more similar. And so, where the government could play a greater role is creating a system where the strengths of different universities are blended. So, institutions, like I said, are well trained to be opportunistic. And if the government decides to play more of a role in encouraging the schools to be better at what they're already good at, we could see a lot of interesting things come out of this. So, in terms of the role the government should play, what they shouldn't do is unilaterally impose mandates upon universities. Rather, differentiation should be a lot more organic. And it should come a lot more from the university itself. But in terms of providing a little bit more guidance, a little bit more leadership, I think that's something that the provincial government especially could do a lot more in providing. So for example, McMaster is a really interesting thing to look at because we're really strong in the area of multidisciplinary studies. So why not that be something that McMaster can privilege itself as one of the best universities in Canada for? So just look at, for example, our communication studies programs. Communications is in the social sciences department, but it also comprises computational linguistics and cognitive science. Or you look at the New Global Health program that we recently introduced. That also comprises, it's a marriage rather, between business, social sciences, and health sciences. So why not have something like an MD and an MBA and an MD program introduced? And these are conversations I've brought up to various administrators. And what's stopping us at this point is a lot of bureaucracy and funding issues. Faculties don't necessarily want to work together if they're not going to be getting appropriate funding or appropriate recognition for what they're doing. So if we look at a funding model that encourages this kind of multidisciplinary program, this is what McMaster can start to be known for. So I think there's a lot of potential with differentiation, but there's also a lot of danger if you don't have the right people involved in the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Dr. Simmons.
Well, there's the idea, and there's the implementation of it. And questions which might arise immediately on thinking about this idea is who chooses which areas we specialise in. And my interest in this is what might get left out in this process. What are the areas that might fall through the gaps? What would students lose, maybe? If you imagine yourself in such an institution, maybe McMaster has chosen to be health. What would students studying in med school lose from not having a university attached with a vibrant research community in other areas? What would researchers lose from not having that community surrounding them with ideas from different disciplines that can feed into health sciences? The other thing that bothers me a little bit is how to balance the outputs of these various institutions. Would we head for example, a saturation point with output of medical students? Probably not. But in other areas, you can see that maybe producing a single commodity is maybe not such a good idea. What happens if the balance of society's needs changes? How quickly are these institutions going to be able to adapt? By doing this, do we lose some flexibility in our system where we have to retool our universities more or less entirely if society changes around them? These are the questions that I would be very interested in looking to see how Ontario intends to manage this if this policy goes ahead.
Dr. Simmons. Phoebe.
I think the current sort of theme is sort of who chooses what areas we specialize in. And I think we had a very good discussion in the good delegation about this. And I think first of all we need to consider what the government knows. Given the fact that they have a good bird's-eye view of the society, they understand, have a better understanding of what society needs. And in a way we believe that gives them sort of a little bit of say as to what schools should specialize in. Not that we think specialization is a good idea. But at the same time, you consider what the school knows. So for example, each school they know their own strengths, they know what they do best, they know what their students want and what their student needs, they see which programs are popular, and I think it's important for the government and the school to work together to sort of cater to society's needs. An example of that would sort of be Ontario not having enough family doctors, for example. I think in a way the government realizes that because they can see that as a need in society, and in a way they could provide we don't believe specialization is a good idea, but we do think maybe providing extra funding for, let's say, a school that specializes in medicine, or it's better, or like produces more doctors, to sort of give them extra funding, but not actually dictate which courses they can keep or which programs they can keep, but in order to enhance the current existing programs to sort of cater to what society actually needs. And in a way, we think the government does have sort of a role in that.
Thank you, Judy. And now open to the floor. Are there any questions? Yes?
I'm wondering what you think about.
Stand and project in the room, please.
I'm wondering what is thought about things like further specialization. Universities will lead to things like even more problem with high class size and problem with testing and things that go along with that, and also things like really high dropout quotas for programs that have, 3 times the number of first years as they can deal with in second year. And I'm wondering how you think specialization will address those problems.
Anyone on the panel would like to take that question? You scared everyone. Your question, if I understand correctly, is whether or not specialization will be less efficient, whether or not it will increase dropouts, whether, despite the report, ECHO's report saying it'll increase the availability of choices to students, that this will actually constrain choices?
Well, not so much it'll constrain choices, but we know that, at McMaster, certainly life sci classes are enormous, and not only instructors, but students and administrators complain about this as being a bad thing. And I think that specialization would lead to larger class sizes, or would suggest they might, and I'm wondering what people would think about whether that was a good thing or how it might be addressed.
Is there a worry that specialization will lead to larger class sizes? Mary?
I guess I'm inclined to agree with you. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of pressure from the province to continue growing, and the only reason that McMaster isn't growing at the rate that it could be is because of the confines of our campus. So literally, the campus capacity is what is preventing us from going from 400-person biology classes to 800-person biology classes. So I don't necessarily know whether that would address that concern or whether that's a major priority.
ECHO released a book, which is a compendium that's much larger and much more in-depth than the ECHO report about differentiation. And in here they talk about market saturation. The whole language is very marketized. It treats students as BIUs, basic income units. Mostly just cattle being herded in Japan and out of Japan later, or slaughterhouse, depending on how the experience was. But there is a question about whether or not there are too many students in university as it stands. Perhaps I turn to our panel and ask, are we opening the doors to too many people for university education, and are we providing too many credentials to the public? We've heard about, BAs don't mean anything anymore, you need an MA, and in 10 years, MAs won't mean anything anymore, you'll need a PhD. Are there thoughts on that?
Well, we don't know for certain how many people that are in university would be better off in some other kind of institution or with some other kind of training. I think the problem with specialization is where the focus is, who decides on the particular specialization. So if it's decided at random by universities, so somebody can discover they get paid by the student. So somebody decides that psychology classes attract 2,000 students, say. So then everybody will want to have a psychology class, and very few will want to